how was Echo Live? Because you were there this weekend, weren't you?
I was there this weekend, and it was a weird one for me because I was selling stuff. I've kind of got over the hump of learning how to sell stuff by realizing I'm not very good at selling stuff. So by next Echo, I'll have probably actually sold a bit more stuff. This time, not so much.
Did you buy anything?
I did, which kind of defeats the object.
To the object.
I sold a few figures, which was difficult because I didn't really want to sell them, but I need the space. And if anything's going to go, it's Black Series because I'm not like a dedicated hardcore collector. So I sold a few bits. And yes, I did. I saw a very nice Mattel San Diego Comic-Con exclusive ATST with Chewbacca sticking his head out the top, which is gorgeous. It opens up into like a diorama box. So that was nice.
Okay.
So I didn't spend a lot, but I didn't sell a lot. So now I know next time I sell, don't just take Black Series because people were walking around the room and looking at all the Black Series. And then it comes to my desk thinking, oh, it's kind of tucked out the way. He'll have interesting stuff. No, I'll just have more Black Series. Live and learn.
So Black Series is what's everybody's trying to kind of shift.
Yeah.
So if you want to get onto Black Series, now's the time to do it.
Big time, yeah. There's deals to be had if you want to get into the Black Series. But I did sell a bit. So I did okay. Don't get me wrong. I did okay. But next time, I'll take half the amount of Black Series and then I will take other duplicates and stuff to move on. I don't expect this to become like a second income. It's probably something I'll only do at Echo twice a year and probably not even every Echo because I actually like just, mooching around and catching up with folks.
Absolutely. And on that note, welcome to Making Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
I got Fantha.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file.
That doesn't sound too hard.
Boom! This is Making Tracks.
This is the way.
Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
I know these people. They are brutal. Does this look Jedi to you?
That's not how the Force works.
They'll never see it coming.
Count me in.
Misa back.
Let's talk news.
I wouldn't even call this news. I would call this opinion. There's an article, and it basically talks about Harrison Ford and says whether or not you would think, it's a Vanity Fair article, you would consider Harrison Ford to be a funny guy. Now, we've seen Harrison be dry, be witty, but he's not exactly known for his stand-up comedy. What would you think of Harrison Ford being described as a funny guy? Because he's on Shrinking, season 2 of Shrinking on Apple TV, Apple Plus. And it's going down great guns, and people are saying, what a great piece it is. And he describes himself as a silly person, but he comes across as a very not silly and very, very serious guy. Where do you think this humour so late in his career has come from?
Probably because he doesn't give a crap anymore. He kind of always felt that he took himself pretty seriously, but at the same time, we kind of saw through especially around The Force Awakens, with all that stuff he did with like Jimmy Kimmel and that, and Chewbacca and the affair with Leia and all that. It was all very funny, but he played it so straight. You can get a lot of mileage comedy-wise out of doing that. What's your take on this?
I've not seen it either. I've seen clips. There's definitely a dry humour. I think like Leslie Nielsen was like playing it straight, wasn't he? But he was the funniest guy in the room. So I'm not putting Harrison Ford on Leslie Nielsen's level because Nielsen was a genius and he came from a serious Shakespearean actor. He's the straight guy in Forbidden Planet. He was a serious actor. And then he does Airplane and Police Squad. It all goes off from there, and that's his thing. Well, a little bit late in the day for Harrison Ford to make a career change like that, I would say. But I suppose you go back to Indy. Harrison as Indy wasn't taking himself too seriously.
No, I don't think so. And I mean, and that was the one thing I thought was quite interesting tonally. More about the relationship between Han and Chewie, especially in Force Awakens. It was very much that straight man, and the comedy seemed to come from Chewbacca. Han's, translating it, which was where the funny stuff kind of came in about. It was slightly like that Roger Moore era of Bond as well. Not quite as kind of like comedic and camp in that kind of way, but there was definitely a tongue in cheek in places, and there's definitely humor to lighten the mood of some things that could be quite tense and dark and stuff in places. So it's how you deliver it, isn't it, at the end of the day?
If he's doing straight man, essentially dry, I think he's very dry personality, Harrison Ford. And I think a lot of what he says over the years has probably been misread. He's probably in there thinking, that's quite cool. And people are just seeing his demeanour and thinking he's being serious. So, and he says it himself, that he is quite kind of goofy and likes to be silly. So I think it's interesting that the showrunner of Shrinking has looked at that, Bill Lawrence, and sort of says, it's crazy. He's a comedic actor. I mean, from a marketing point of view, it's a great thing to have as a hook line on your interviews. We've got some comedy out of Harrison Ford. Getting him on telly for a start is amazing, isn't it?
The streaming landscape is perfect for these aging actors who, in a more kind of like bygone era, would have been aged out pretty much of just about most roles, barring grandpa or crusty old guy on the sidewalk. So it's always a fun opportunity to see stuff, and that's just a thing, isn't it? Because like you said, he says he's a silly person. So, but I just always wonder.
Quite possibly. I mean, we keep seeing him at Halloween dressed up as sticks of broccoli and dragging it up and going as Kiss and all sorts of stuff. I think he went as like a blueberry the one year. Definitely good for a laugh, isn't it? There's no doubt about that. And he was, don't forget, he was with Carrie Fisher for a while. She had one of the driest, sharpest senses.
Oh, God, yeah.
Even as a younger lady, she was sharp as a tack. So he must have had to be able to spar with her in that sense to a certain degree.
I was going to say, I think with Carrie, you really had to like hold your ground. And even the couple of occasions that I've met her, like you have to be awake, even if she's still hungover. You still need to be right on your toes. So.
Hi, this is Dorian Kinji, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So regular listeners to Making Tracks will know that it was only a few short weeks ago we welcomed Steve onto the show to talk about the then forthcoming Rancho Obi-Wan benefit taking place in Seattle. Well, that's been and gone. There were some mega announcements coming out the back end of that show, and we've got Steve and Lisa Stevens from the Imperial Archive back on the show to talk all about the event, about their collections, and about the Saga Museum. So here's ourselves with Lisa and with Steve here on Making Tracks. Steve, Lisa, welcome to Making Tracks. Loads of questions all about Saga Museum, but first, you had a wonderful benefit in Seattle. Can you guys tell us a little bit about how that went? Because quite apart from the Saga Museum news, of course, there was the Rancho benefit in Seattle. So how did that all go?
The Rancho benefit went really well. We had Mark Daniel there as our MC, and he really kept things moving. Mark Rossiano, the behind-the-scenes video master, kept things displayed on the big screen. We had some wonderful video cuts, and we have a 5-minute video that really delves behind the 4 collections and what our purpose is and why we've gotten together. And it's almost emotional, or it is emotional, actually. So we're very pleased with the way that turned out.
I think another big thing that happened is we raised a record amount of money through our silent auctions and the live auctions we did there. So that was very successful for us. And it was a beautiful place.
And through Lisa's matching contribution too, which was a wonderful surprise.
I sprung it on the day of the thing.
Oh, wow.
That's the kind of surprise we like.
Surprises like that I can take.
Yeah. Those are the good surprises. Yeah.
We figured we had to launch the Saga Museum with something special. So this was a nice special event. And we had a little guitar exhibit there of Star Wars guitars. And one of them even got auctioned off. There was a custom-made guitar made out of a Millennium Falcon that was just gorgeous. And one of our guests actually won the bidding and then donated it to Rancho Obi-Wan. So Steve's going to have it.
So it was a great a great surprise when I first saw a picture of that thing being made by one of the Seattle area collectors based on the really cool poster art that our friend Kurt Hanks came up with the Millennium Falcon as a guitar, which was brilliant because Mopop, the museum, started out as a music museum and has a lot of Jimi Hendrix and other related rock material. And of course, Seattle is the birthplace of punk rock and
grunge.
I always get those two mixed up.
Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden,
Alice in Chains.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So it was a wonderful weekend, and we got to meet a lot of friends and renewed acquaintances with a lot of people. So it was super, and a great place to announce the launch of the Saga Museum of Star Wars Memorabilia.
Yes, which we will get to in a minute. But At least for me, and I even think for the other Mark. I mean, we know Steve very well, but Lisa, we don't kind of know you very well per se. And so, can you tell us a little bit about like the Imperial Archives and what you've been doing over there and how long has it been running for and all that?
Well, I mean, so I've always been a big Star Wars fan since the original movie, and my husband Vic was too. Now he's a little younger than me. He was he would have been 6 years old when this original Star Wars movie came out, and I would have been much older, probably about 14. And and so, we were slightly different. He was into the action figures, and I was into the books and the comics and things. Um, when we first got together as a couple in the early 1990s, we just, as we kind of were exploring what each other liked in life, we found out we both liked Star Wars. And what happened is I was at Toys R Us in 1995, and the new Hasbro action figures had just come out, the new one, the modern ones, and there was a Boba Fett, and Vic had told me his favorite character when he was a kid was Boba Fett, so I bought it for him just as kind of a lark and gave it to him at dinner that night, and then next time we were in Toys R Us, he went over and said, "Oh, they got Darth Vader and they got this," and all of a sudden he's buying them all, and before you know it, then we went off to like a convention. At the convention, he got all the action figures autographed by Dave Prowse and Jeremy Bullock and Peter Mayhew and stuff. And it was just like, all of a sudden we were hitting, antique stores and Goodwills and whatever, trying to find Star Wars stuff, comic book stores, and it just when eBay hit, boom. And that kind of happened right about the same time that I first met Steve, which was 1999 at the Celebration 1. We met. He was there at the Tomart booth. Actually, I believe is when actually where I met you because you were doing signings of your hardcover Tomart guide.
Oh yeah.
So I still have my autographed Steve Sansweet Tomart guide. It became kind of my Bible. I bought a soft copy, and that thing is rat-eared, stuff like that. But then eBay, kind of let me say, take what was in that Tomart guide and go looking for it and stuff. And so Vic and I just started, exploding at that point. And then at that exact same, and then at the episode 1 premiere in Seattle, I met Gus Lopez and a bunch of other people up here in Seattle from the Sarlacc group, which is our collecting group up here. And Vic had actually been on their mailing list for a while, but no one had ever met him. And they all thought it was an alter ego of Gus's, that Gus was like, had an alter ego that he was like, kind of like screwing around with them on and stuff. And they met, oh, it's actually your guy, it's a real guy. And so we met all these people and started hanging out. And then there was a really good group of people at the time up here that were really getting into prototypes and props and things like that. And so that kind of exploded, and it started taking over our house so much. And Steve knows how this works, and you start collecting. It takes over your life and every square foot of space you have. And so when we built a new house in 2002, we ended up building it kind of with our collection in mind. We actually built exactly kind of what we wanted, but then that got filled up, and so we built a 10,000 square foot building out on my land outside of my house, and that's currently what we're filling up, and it will fill up.
And you also have some professional experience with Star Wars too.
I do have a little bit of professional. Yeah, I was. Let's see. At Wizards of the Coast, we got the Star Wars license in 90. I want to say 98, 90, somewhere in there. And I was the brand manager for Star Wars there for the role-playing game and the trading card game we did. And we also were running the fan club at the time. And then when I left Wizards and started Paizo, I was Paizo Publishing at the time, we ended up taking Star Wars Insider and the fan club with us for a few years over there. And yeah, so I was the president of the Star Wars fan club for a few years, and
nice.
And we did, Yeah, and then also just working on Star Wars stuff at Wizards.
So not much then.
No.
Just a few things
It
here and
only
there. That's just
it only takes that one action figure to lead you on a path of no return.
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely taken over our life, which is, I mean, a good thing. It's like if you're gonna have something take over your life, this is a lot better than a lot of things. And so because it's
Absolutely.
the fan community is so amazing. The friendships we've forged with through the years with people who are collectors, and it's just wonderful. And it's something that Vic and I do together. It's really kind of our together time. One of our, there's a few things we do like to do together, and Star Wars is a big part of that. So
You've got these 4 incredible collections between the group that have come together for Saga Museum. What initiated the conversation? What was the kernel of making you guys come together and go, maybe this is a good idea, and just percolated from there? Where did it start?
I mean, it's I don't think I had a single point of genesis other than all of us are getting older and none of us have kids. And so I know I had mentioned to Steve a couple times, what is going to happen when when you pass on. I mentioned to Duncan, I mentioned to Gus. I know Gus talked to Steve. Duncan talked to Gus. Everybody kind of like had this conversation at different times and different places. And it was just sort of like, what can we do? I had an ongoing nightmare, of Vic and I die in a tragic accident. My mom, bless her heart, comes to my house, sees all these toys, says, well, these things aren't worth anything. And she takes my Rocket Fire Boba Fett and puts like 10 cents on it, puts it on a rummage sale, Ben, and stuff like that, just like throwing things away. Well, this is garbage. This is no good. And, you're like, no, Mom. And so it's just, you're sitting up in heaven, just like looking down, screaming, trying to like, and so there's this kind of like, I'd always had this sort of like worry about what happens, if something, I didn't want really being sold and broken up either. So I think that was a big part of the genesis, is just trying to like, what can we do to take these collections and make them live on beyond our lives and have a purpose and a history beyond just our time here on the earth and a legacy to leave behind. Steve?
Part of our fun in having these collections and building these collections is sharing them with fellow fans and collectors around the world. I mean, I went to the extreme and opened Rancho Obi-Wan 12 years ago as a nonprofit institution. We booked tours from our online site, ranchoobiwan.org, and we do tours on Saturdays, and we do educational tours and adult tours. We have a disability group coming in on Friday. And so it's sharing it, but the other collectors also love to share in a more personal way because their homes are not open to the public as such. But I used to say many years ago, I was asked in the 90s what was going to happen to my collection after I passed on. And I said, I'm going to be laid out in the middle of the museum and it's going to be imploded around me. And some people actually thought it was true. So no, it is not, and I want that to be part of my legacy, just like Lisa and Vic and Gus and Duncan want that to be part of their legacy. So about 3.5 years ago, serious discussions started among a small team of our directors, and near weekly meetings and reading books and talking to lots of people and visiting museums and getting backstage tours around the U.S. and hiring a consultant about a year ago, a fundraising consultant who doesn't raise the funds for you, but gets you to the point where you can start raising funds.
Right.
And so this has been in the works for over 3 years. And we finally got to the point where we were ready to make a public announcement. And we figured that the fundraiser would be a great place to do it. And Seattle was great because Gus and Lisa and Vic have their amazing collections up there. And we had add-on tours of their collections on the Friday before the Saturday event. So all worked out really well.
Fantastic. So can you tell us a bit more about actually what the Saga Museum is going to be? Obviously, it's a coming together of 4 mega collections, but are we looking at a similar kind of model to Rancho Obi-Wan with kind of like a community aspect to it?
Well, we're looking to merge the collections, which contain, in our best estimate, over 1.5 million pieces of Star Wars memorabilia, ranging from the toys and quirky things to amazing props and costumes to prototype toys to amazing paper ephemera, parts of the wonderful Kenner and later Hasbro manufacturing process of making the toys. So everything you would see, plenty of stuff to be able to have revolving exhibits, special exhibits. We want people to have fun. Our intention is to do a public-facing museum. We've picked 8 cities. Our next goal is to settle on one of those cities, to ask them for proposals, and to raise $2 million over the next couple of years in order to fund our working capital, hiring advisors, architects if we need them. We could take over an existing building. We want to do a pop-up exhibit by the time of the Star Wars 50th anniversary in 2027. That would show sort of a proof of concept, which we had at the last celebration in Anaheim before the UK celebration. We did pieces from 4 of our collections, from Boba Fett to The Mandalorian, and that worked out really well. It took about a year to pull things together, but we know we can do it and pick the very choicest things from the 4 collections to come up with themes. So a lot of work ahead of us. We're really not just getting started, but in a way, we're starting the public aspect of our museum development. We've been in touch with Lucasfilm over the years, so they have signed off on the idea. George has not raised any objections. He's doing his own museum, which is a narrative art museum in Los Angeles. He'll have some Star Wars things, but it's his Norman Rockwell collection and other art that tells stories. So we're in good stead, and it's going to be an interesting journey ahead.
One thing I want to add to that is, I think we really want to also have this be a world-class museum. I mean, something on the line of some of the top museums in the world, with professionally designed exhibits, experiences that tell stories through the artifacts and through the pieces, the memorabilia that we have. We want to talk about, and this is, one of the things, the books I think that started me collecting and stuff was Steve's From Concept to Screen, the collectible book, which came out in the early 90s. And, I've been, one of the things we've been talking about is like taking that a step and having the concept of the museum be from concept to screen to collectible to community. And, and having, that be kind of a throughput for what exhibits we have. And there'll be permanent exhibits, there'll be temporary exhibits. We may even have traveling exhibits come through if Lucasfilm is doing a big, a big traveling exhibit like they have in the past. We'd hope they'd stop at our museum. So we're kind of setting ourselves up to be that way and to have a place that we could do educational programming, where we could have big events. We want to have a big theater in there where we could show movies, where we could have people come and talk and give like presentations. I mean, almost anything you could think of. There'll be a restaurant, there'll be all kinds of stuff. The idea is taking this to the next level into a world-class type of a museum.
We intend for this museum to be inspirational above all else. Fun, inspirational, and educational. So that's our goal, and that's our intention to go along that path.
You mentioned that you've sort of narrowed it down to 8 locations that you'd like to choose one from. What would that city or town have to offer you to make you want to go there? For a location, what's the hook that you're really looking for?
Well, under the best of all possible circumstances and dreams, it would be a location that the city would own, that they could give us, a plot of land, a building, tax breaks, things that you invest in as a municipality to bring more visitors in. I think a Star Wars museum in the right area would be really something that would draw lots of visitors. And because of our idea of having revolving exhibits, we would have repeat visitors. So it needs to be in a major metropolitan area, easy to get to, fairly easy to get to with public transportation for visitors as well as the people who live in the area. And that's why we will send out requests for proposals or RFPs.
You know, we did quite a great little like, I don't know what you can call, like, a little process, you know, of figuring out what is important in the city. Ann Newman, our president of Rancho Obi-Wan and the Saga Museum, has led our group in this process. And we literally took like 30, 40 different elements, like, you know, how many tourists did they get? How many hotels are available? What's the cost of living there? What's the, you know, the political climate? What's, you know, the philanthropic climate in the city? Everything you could think of. We went, researched, figured out, you know, and then we ranked what's important to us, which of these things, you know, like, for instance, one of the things we really wanted is an area where the city is very inclusive and diverse and has lots of different types of people and stuff. That was important to us, you know. And just, you know, but we did this whole process and it was really fun. It was actually sitting down and figuring out what was important, and then we had originally had like 15, 18 different cities. We eliminated a bunch out because it didn't meet certain criteria that we said were important, you know, like a big enough tourism industry or whatever, right? So Anne did a great job. I mean, she found a way to take things that are kind of touchy-feely and make them into something more quantitative that allowed us, because a bunch of us are pretty, you know, I guess it's right brain. Is that the one that's all like, you know, numbers and things? And, you know, and so she, you know, and Anne's definitely more of the other side of the brain. She's very much touchy-feely and what feels good to her. And she found a way to actually make that into numbers and stuff, which was just beautiful. And it really got us to think about it. So, you know, I think we go into this process now with a lot of understanding of what we're looking for.
So our list of cities includes San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, Las Vegas. We've got a couple of cities in the East Coast, Boston and New York. I think it's more likely this will end up somewhere on the West Coast, but there are a lot of things to consider, and we're looking forward to getting more advanced in this selection process. The San Francisco Chronicle had an exclusive on the formation of the museum, and as a result of that, one of the people, our public relations counsel in San Francisco, has been contacted by a number of landlords and building owners. We've talked to city departments already. So it just in the space of a week or so, Anne has gone down and toured a couple of locations for potential pop-up museum or something more long-term. So we're well underway here, and we're going to spread that process out. We hope to come up with a firm location in the next year and a half.
I mean, if we had druthers, we'd have it figured out by next summer. You know, whether that will happen, you know, we'll see. But you know, it'd be nice if we could get some sort of, because everything, this, you know, once you got that's the location, then everything starts coming together better. It's easier to raise money, and most of the money you raise tends to be local to the museum. So
yeah, it's really important for the fundraising is to have the location. That's one of the first things. We approached some people on an ex post facto basis before we made the announcement. And where's the museum going to be? I mean, that's always the first question.
Yeah.
So once we can answer that, we'll be in good stead, and we can start running.
So is the plan to ideally build a custom bespoke building, or are you looking to maybe convert, or is that still completely open at this point, I suppose?
I think it's pretty open right now, and a lot depends on what we find in the various locations. And ideally, we'd have a couple $100 million and build a bespoke museum, but that's not easy these days.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of you need to find the right benefactors. But I think, as Lisa said, once you find the city and identify it, then the fundraising becomes more specific and more directed.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I suppose you want the support of the local community, and they're the ones who are going to get excited about it. So,
and we'd like the support of the entire Star Wars fandom community and collectors around the world. We've already gotten great reaction from our social media postings.
But that was one of my questions. What would you want from the broader community? Because obviously you've got to, once you've focused down on where you're going to be, as you say, it's a lot of local interaction, but then this is a global Star Wars community. So how can people out there help get the word out? What could people do?
Well, we really need funds. We've started out with the auctions and the fundraiser event in Seattle. But now we're on the road to try to raise $2 million over the next 2 years to start the process, and then see what we need to raise from there. But to hire at least an architect or a redeveloper, a designer, a fundraising company. So we've got a lot to go. I've heard from a number of collectors who said, "Oh, I'd like to donate my collection to you when I pass on." And it said, "Well, that's all well and good, but we need to raise the money first to get the museum going." So people are willing to do that, but we need something more.
You've got 4 incredible collections. Now, can I assume there's an element of overlap between those collections?
There is some element of overlap, especially between Duncan Jenkins' collection and my collection. Duncan is more, I've got a little of everything. I specialize in posters and the action figures. Duncan really goes into the international versions of things, and he may have 6 games and different international versions or action figures on multiple cards. Lisa and Vic have an amazing collection of high-end items, prototype toys, amazing flat files filled with mind-blowing art and pre-production art and things of that nature. And Gus has what is undoubtedly the world's best collection of Star Wars original props and costumes and masks, and the original
and cereal. And
cereal. Yeah, Gus is the cereal king. Gus, there is nobody who can come close to Gus on cereal.
Hey, there's definitely overlap. But that's good, because you might need different exhibits could use some of the same items. We once we're going, we want to do a touring exhibit. That's something that a lot of museums will do to get, take parts of their collections, make a touring exhibit. So having duplication allows us a lot of flexibility to do things like that, or to do temporary things. A lot of times, like I know Rancho Obi-Wan gets asked to set up things either at Lucasfilm or at Giant Stadium or whatever, different venues. They set up these small little exhibits of things for special occasions and stuff. So, having duplication is never a bad thing. And so we definitely have some of that in there, because, I'm not quite as completist as Duncan and Steve, but we definitely have a lot of things, including all the, little crazy things,
Lisa, I forget, what's the current tally as to the total number of rocket fets that the collection share?
I was going to ask.
Well, I have 3. You have 2, and Gus has 2, right?
Yeah.
I don't think Duncan has any.
Poor Duncan doesn't have any, but he can share our.
What? How have you even let him into the museum? But,
Yeah. That's a prerequisite, surely.
Yeah.
Well, he's a nice guy. He's a
Because-
nice guy. We love his wife.
Because
Yeah.
he has the rarest piece of food stuff.
was gonna say.
Oh my God! Yes.
That is this Star Wars TV dinner for kids from way back when.
From
Amazing.
Just like
1977.
yeah,
Wow.
Midwest. It's the only box that we know of. Gus has the front of one of the boxes of the TV dinners, but it was a regional item. I've been looking on eBay for 15 years. Nothing ever comes close.
So you mentioned that in the museum, when you get it all up and running and everything's tickety-boo, and presumably we've probably celebrated the 50th anniversary by then, that you're going to have it as exhibits. So you'll have a theme for January to April, and then a theme for May to whatever. Is that kind of the plan? So you, like you say, you keep hitting that repeat visit.
Well, as Lisa said, we'll have permanent exhibits.
Mhm.
Some of the rare things. I don't think we take the Death Star away. I mean, that is like one of the prime items in the total collection. But we would have revolving exhibits. So there would be a room that would be set up that we can move things in and out. So every 6 months to a year, we would change that exhibit. It could focus on cereal, for example, or it could focus on international items, or it could focus on something that I've been into lately is rock band posters from the 70s through the current year, which use Star Wars themes, not licensed, but because the bands are fans of Star Wars. So there's lots of those things, and they're difficult to find. But I've managed to put together a bunch of those. So music, Star Wars and music. So there are all kinds of ideas for exhibits that would go out for as long as you can imagine.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds. Bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
And in the intervening time, whilst this is all being done, and clearly from what you've said, it's a lot of work now, let alone when the ball really gets rolling. Your individual collections, Steve, with Rancho and everything else that's going on, presumably everything just keeps ticking along with all the other collections until such a point that you push the go button and it all comes together.
Right. So Rancho Obi-Wan will continue doing tours as it's done in the past. We'll continue having fundraisers for Rancho and the Saga Museum as we do a dual track to raise money for the Saga Museum and do other functions as necessary to get us to our goal. And but Rancho will remain for the foreseeable future as the place that it has been on a former chicken ranch.
As Star Wars fans, we all sort of wrap our identity into elements of our fandom. So for me, it's Fantha. For Mark, it's Rebel Legion. Steve, it's Rancho. And Lisa, it's the Imperial Archive. So how difficult is it to kind of cut those ties to a degree, because you are forging ahead to something new, but also leaving something very precious behind? How has that been, just shift the mindset for both of you? Because it's such a monumental thing to attempt.
It's interesting because since we started doing this thing, there's been this sort of feeling of our collections already being ours as a group. I mean, it's funny, we'll go be doing auctions and stuff like that, with Prop Store and stuff. And we'll be texting each other, you gonna go for that? I wouldn't mind that and stuff. But we, and I get excited when Duncan or Steve or Gus wins something, and it's in the past, I've been oh, they beat me on that. Now it's oh, we got that. It's ours now. And so it's, I mean, to me, it's a beautiful thing, because I know that in the future, and it's going to take a while, by the way, to get all these things into the museum. I mean, as Steve said, 1.5 million items. They have to be photographed, cataloged. They have to be stored in a conservation-minded way. All this stuff needs to be, it takes time, effort, and stuff. You can't, you're not just loading up a couple of U-Hauls and dumping them out in the back. It's going to take time. I estimate it probably could take 25 years, of
Not that long. I won't be around for 25 years.
Well, I guess we'll start with Rancho, but you know what I mean? It's gonna have to, you know, it's gonna take time. It's gonna take some effort, you know, and you know, depending on how much money we have, how many people we hire. But you know, bottom line is it's not a quick process, and so you know, it's gonna take time to integrate all these collections together. What'll happen is we'll build these our exhibits, our permanent exhibits, and our first temporary exhibits, and we'll take all the items from the collections that are needed for that, and those will go in first, and we'll build that, and then from there we'll start planning our other exhibits, how they're going to change, and those items will come in, and it'll do that, and then eventually it'll be like, okay, we're going to take, you know, all of this collection and integrate it in and stuff like that. So I think it'll be an interesting little process back and forth, but you know, I don't expect that that like my collection will be gone entirely for a while.
Yeah, and I suppose all the time they're making TV shows and films and producing merch, about 1.5 million or whatever, it's going to keep on increasing, isn't it? So
I get shipments every day.
Yeah, you go.
You think Disney is going to keep making Star Wars merchandise, Mark?
Well, you know, how naive of me.
Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff out since Disney took over. I'll tell you.
Exactly. And there's a lot of cool stuff. I mean,
Very
like I said,
cool
there's really a day goes by we don't have something coming into the front door.
So one of the things that me and Mark do at the start of each of our podcasts is we ask each other, what have we received recently for our collections? So it would be rude not to ask both Steve and Lisa. You know, so what have you received? I don't know, the last 48 hours. Let's say let's narrow it down a bit.
Sure. Well, I mean, I got some things from the last prop store auction.
Cool.
They did in LA. So something I've been trying to get for a long time. But Gus Lopez cornered the market on it was the crew parka and stuff from the I think Norway. You know, shooting for Empire. I've been wanting to get one of those, you know, crew and costume's not the right word, but you know, gear,
jacket,
and jacket and the hat and you know the baklava and everything else. And so I finally got one of those. Got the one that Alan Booth, who is the guy. He worked on the sets and stuff like that. Was kind of a carpenter art guy. And I got his thing, and so that came in. And then I have a whole focus on Larry Noble, you know, the guy who did the Yoda. That's you know that's at the Presidio and things like that. He's done a lot of different bronzes and stuff, and I have a bunch of that. And the other thing I got was when he first did his first Yoda, he made a bronze Yoda about, you know, yay high, and he did 3 of them. He did one for himself, one for his father, and one for a collector named William Plum, who unfortunately died a number of years ago here now, and his collection's been coming into and being sold off, you know, and so I made sure I got that because I have a bronze Yoda in my house and I have a bunch of other Larry Noble stuff, so it was really important for me to get that piece to kind of like tie in. It was the prototype that kind of became the 10th anniversary bronze Yoda he did, where he did 100 pieces for the 10th anniversary. So those are like 2 of the cool things that I got recently.
That's fantastic. And Steve?
So my most recent big purchase was something that I wanted that Disney was selling, limited edition, which was the Star Speeder 3000 with the screen. And I got shoved out at the Disney store line very early. And so they were all gone, and then some showed up at Orlando in the park. So I caved and bought one on eBay and got it, and I don't regret paying extra for it because it's an amazing piece. I love the Star Speeder and the whole Star Tours ride. I wrote a front page story for the Wall Street Journal when Star Tours first opened at Disneyland way back when. And that was great. So I've loved the ride and everything that goes along with it and the merchandise. And this is an incredible piece. So they're still making great stuff.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's well worth it. It's a beautiful piece.
Well, this has been fantastic to get you guys on to talk about this. Lisa, first time on Making Tracks, so thank you so much. Steve, how long has it been since you were last on? About 3 weeks?
About that.
And we will not leave it too long before you have on again, because obviously there's so much due to happen and so much news going to be coming out from this whole Saga Museum project. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark Squared.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you for the invite and just doing everything you do for the communities.
This past weekend was the 15th running of Echo Base Live in Redditch. It was, as always, an astounding success. We talked about it at the top of the show. I was dealing at the show. Dealing just sounds terrible, but no, I wasn't a very good dealer. But anyway, it was a great weekend. And as a consequence of the event, they raised a fantastic total for charity. They brought in £4,834, with all proceeds going to the Older Hay Children's Charity in Liverpool. Absolutely fantastic. I think as a grand total, they've brought in about 150,000 over the past 10 years. It's absolutely insane numbers. But my broader question to you, Mark, as somebody who is head of a costuming organisation here in the UK, who goes out on events all the time, you were at an event that was clashing with Echo, which meant you couldn't be there. The charity aspect of doing a Star Wars event, what the involvement, the details, the coercing people to be there, the shaking of the tins. There's a lot that goes into raising, for example, the best part of £5,000 at an event. You've got a better view on it than me because I'm not at the sharp end like you are. But when you're doing events like this and organising stuff, how much of a consideration is that charity aspect?
It has to be a pretty big consideration. And I think these days, kind of Star Wars and charity kind of tend to go very well hand in hand. So, what we found over the years is that sometimes it's really beneficial to pick a bigger, well-known charity, and other times it's you get better resonance by the people attending if it's a more local charity, So that has to come into it, and also then, it's trying to how do you tie it in? For example, I'm currently in the throes of planning for MCM Birmingham at the end of November, and we've approached a charity. And it's, to be fair, it's sometimes when you actually have a charity there to collect, it takes a ton of responsibility off of the costume clubs, because for one, especially since the pandemic, nobody carries cash around anymore, right?
No.
So and through the nature of the clubs, where in the UK, none of the clubs, I think, with the exception of maybe the Mandos and even Matt's maybe internationally, none of them are registered charities, because we don't collect for a specific charity. We collect for many charities depending on time of year and what we're doing. We're not registered as non-profits because that's actually quite difficult to do, and you have to prove so many years worth of bank accounts, stuff like that. So we kind of fit in this really kind of grey area whereby when you try to speak to people like Sum Up to actually take out an account and be able to enable the use of these contactless readers, they just think you're money laundering. It's amazing. You send them a website, you kind of show them what you do on social media, and they still don't believe you. So it makes it very difficult. And then, of course, if you don't have a card reader these days, everybody's like, oh, I don't have any change. So, and then you miss out a ton. I mean, there's other options that we do. You can use QR codes, but then, if you're at the Excel, for example, like at Star Celebration, then, the sheer amount of people in one area just overloads the networks and you just can't get on anywhere. So you take a hit. So you have to be kind of very forward thinking about how you're going to collect and where you're going to collect. And also, if you're then doing a charity event, then, if you do a social thing in the evening for the members or anything, then it's where can we kind of capitalize and get more money? Because that's also a really good fundraiser. Normally, I think a lot of the events that we do where we have a social aspect and there might be an auction or even a raffle, that tends to be where you actually get a lot of the donations, because people, tend to kind of put their hands in their pocket, especially for charity auctions, a lot deeper than they might do for just a donation, on a convention. It's fantastic. And it's, congratulations to Echo Live, because £4,834 is a lot of money. And so Alder Hay Hospital should be very, very happy with that. I'd like to hope, and like I said, it's a reason at least why the costume clubs exist. Really, it may not necessarily be the reason that members get into it, but then actually you find out this is what the main motivation of the clubs are. Actually, feel more worthwhile going back extra mile to events or to spend a little bit extra time on the detail of the costumes. So it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship after all.
I think what Wayne and the team at Echo have done is they've made that charity fundraising aspect really intrinsic to the whole thing. So whilst it is now undoubtedly the biggest European collectors event, and I think some people were saying it was one of the biggest ones in the world, really. It was absolutely crammed as usual and does fantastic business. But it's very much part of the core of what they do. In your experience now, you've just mentioned post-COVID, I don't really carry much change or notes now. Most of it is on the card. And real world practical issues like the Wi-Fi being crap or just not having the card reader working or whatever would hinder being able to bring money in. Do you find people, given that, not just here in the UK, but around the world, financially, people have took a bit of a hit over the last few years. There's been plenty of things that have sucked our money away before we've got to the point of spending it at a convention. Do you find people are as generous these days as they ever have been, or more driven to find focal points to, sort of funnel their charity work towards? Or how do you see it from where you are?
Interestingly, I find if somebody has a really positive experience, and we saw this actually with some of the interactions we had with the public at London Film Comic Con, if you kind of engage with a member of the public, especially if you've got kids, and it's not just a photo and maybe spend a little bit of time with them, they tend to be a little bit more kind of willing to donate a £5 or a £10. And that's the thing, there were people at that event who were like, oh, I'll just donate later. So you give them the QR code and it's like, you're not going to donate, either because you're going to forget or whatever. And it's like, it's fine, because it's completely optional. And then there were people who just stood there and couldn't kind of log on properly and that, so we kind of helped them out. And then they donated like a tenner or more. So you can go, well, fair enough. So you appreciate that. And so I think that's what it is. It's experiential these days, where, like I said, the whole thing with buckets is difficult. I mean, it's difficult anyway because, we don't like the actual costumers holding the bucket. So then you need a crew member around to do it. And you then need to make sure the crew member's in a prime position to be able to be noticed, because, you're not supposed to shake and rattle tins and buckets and stuff, so it's there's always little things to kind of consider. But and as you said, the cost of living has affected everybody. But then I think that is possibly more evident when you go to conventions, just because people aren't buying as much stuff generally. And then, part of the conversation and the negotiations I have with MCM Read Pop is like, look, we've got people taking 3 days off of work to do the conventions. We're not getting paid for this. I mean, we appreciate the fact that they give us the entry for free because we are an exhibit or an attraction, shall we say. However, you go, right, so it's 3 days worth of like food for that person if they're buying it at the convention, which we know is like normally silly money, but also like parking and stuff like that. So then you can go, well, we're collecting money for charity and we want people to be there. So it has to be kind of reciprocal. So therefore, can you give us parking passes or something like that? So sometimes, the convention companies, just by doing that, they're indirectly helping the charities. They just may not necessarily see it that way.
So when you go to an event now, is it as much in your mind that you want to corral the team to raise as much money as you possibly can? Or do you still go for the love of Star Wars? Is it just one not work with the other anymore? Would you just go in costume as a Star Wars cosplayer? Or would you just go and shake a tin? Do you know what I'm saying? Do the two things work together?
I mean, they do, and especially at conventions, because you normally have a focal base, so it's very easy to kind of put up your charity club information stuff as well. And then other times, we do get invited and to just do an appearance and just do a bucket collection. Obviously, the conventions had a tendency to attract more members because there's normally other things going on, and therefore that's a benefit. But ultimately, whenever we're there really we're doing both really. It's kind of creating some fun experience and memories and happy smiles on people's faces for the public. And if that then leads to a donation, either directly or indirectly, well, then we've definitely done the job.
Hi, this is Andy Seacombe, otherwise known as Watto, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So, final thing today, we have a listener's question. It is from Mark and Corin Spriggs. Good evening, Marks. Following on from Echo Base Live, it was lovely to see you, Mr. N, with my son Corin and chat about the podcast, which is a real lifesaver of the last 9 months of driving up and down between St Helens and Essex each weekend. With the disappointment over Tales of the Jedi not being the stories of Ulic Qel-Droma, Exar Kun, and Nomi Sunrider, what other Dark Horse comic tales would you like to see? And should Tales of the Jedi, as described above, come back in live action or animation? Mark and Corin Spriggs. So, great question and an interesting one. It's not about Ulic Qel-Droma and Exar Kun and all those characters. It's another tale. Start with that second point. If they ever did a Tales of the Jedi and went back to that old Dark Horse era, do you think that's something they could do in animation?
I mean, they could definitely do it in animation, easy. And I think what would be cool if they were to do an animation, when you basically just do it with a similar kind of style to the artwork. I mean, it was illustrated by Chris Gossett back in 1996, written by Kevin J. Anderson. So it was some serious kind of stuff at the time. And it's, I think, still one of the memorable, that whole kind of era, the Golden Age of Sith, the Fall of the Empire and all that. And Tales of
you
Jedi.
had all those Hugh Fleming covers as well, didn't you? Which looked amazing. So
yeah, I mean, and it's weird because Nomi Sunrider is a character still kind of I hear get mentioned all the time. So whilst I would be mightily surprised, I would literally eat my RS prop Stormtrooper helmet. If it were the case. But who's not to say that some of that, those characters may end up being pulled into the canon. I mean, that would be the cool thing, I mean, there's Dawn of the Jedi, and it's we could take it literally to mean like the very, very first Jedi, but who's to say that actually maybe it's more like it, it's the emergence of maybe the first, what we consider maybe modern Jedi, for example, I don't know. So there's that. And in terms of Tales of the Jedi and Dark Horse comics, it ran for so many years. Was it what 90? So 95 through to 2011, 12, was it?
Yeah.
Well,
the Dark Horse era.
Yeah.
That was 92. It was Dark Empire. Was
92.
The first,
there you go.
91, 92. So
exactly, all the way. Yeah. So that's a hell of
20 years.
So that, that in itself is just a massive, huge, pool of resources that you could pull from. I mean, you could, if you literally just remade all of that as animation, that would sort you out for the next 20 years. So,
this came up in conversation at Echo, funny enough, just talking to different people, no one specific person. You know how it is at these events, you chat to lots of folks. And one of the things that came up was, obviously now we're waiting for Skeleton Crew. And the reception to Acolyte was what it was. We've talked about it numerous times. Star Wars could probably right now do with a couple of, not easy wins, that's not the right phrase, but it could probably do with a couple of real hits of adrenaline, a Rogue Squadron series or something like that.
Yeah.
Something that's just going to really kinetically, visually just punch people in the gut in the best way and make people excited for Star Wars. Purely not, I think sometimes people overthink Star Wars. They're always trying to layer messages in, trying to layer in journeys in. And sometimes I think Star Wars is just as much about the cool ships and the big action and the, whatever, the spectacle as it is anything else. Because we know, and we've talked about it loads, that Star Wars is a little bit goofy, a little bit cheesy, but it's also very cool. When something's right with Star Wars, when it's just hitting in the right speeds and all the cylinders are going. So I think something like that would be great. And one of the things that came up in conversation was you've got, and they have delineated legends and canon. So they are, it's not the multiverse or anything, but you can pick from canon and take it in, or rather pick from legends and take it into canon like you've just alluded to. But also, if you wanted to, the animation departments at Skywalker and Lucasfilm could very easily do some of these legends stories as animated films or animated projects. So you could do a Tales of the, a Dark Horse era classic Tales of the Jedi animated show, or you could do an animated Shadows of the Empire or Dark Empire or any of the others. So there are certain things I think that they could dip into if they wanted to, just like almost like a special attraction kind of thing.
Well, it's. I mean, I think we've probably talked about this before, but I mean, if you think about it, your Star Wars Legends now is pretty much like your Marvel What If in some respect. We're not. It's kind of like it's that separate kind of like thread that once established and people understand that it's not canon and although it never really was canon in the grand scheme of things, the expanded universe can be used like that. And then you just think about, okay, well, when you've got all those novels, you've got all those comics and graphic novels, audio books, audio plays. Hell, you could like do an animation version of like, you know, the radio dramas and stuff like that as well, you know. So there's just so many different things. But then obviously it's a case of where do you start? And actually, do you go, well, but you know, the obvious place would be Heir to the Empire and the Thrawn trilogy, or do you go, actually no, because we've now got Thrawn in canon, and let's not confuse people on day one. Let's maybe do something different. Let's do like that, you know, the Han Solo books.
Literally, man, you read my mind. That was literally what I was going to say. Yeah, no, exactly. Just start with the old Brian Daly, the Han Solo trilogy, and also the AC Crispin stuff as well. You could work it so that everything fits as much as you want it to fit. I mean, that's the thing. Legends did fit pretty well. I mean, there's always inconsistencies like there is in everything, but
there's
fit pretty well.
Inconsistencies in canon now, isn't there? Really,
exactly. But you could make it in such a way that it's not stepping on the toes of the canon, but it is definitely its own thing. I think there's loads of options if they wanted to do it. And sort of dipping further into the question, I mean, there's what other Dark Horse stuff would you like to see? And we've just mentioned it. I'd love to see Dark Empire. And I think most of these, to me, feel like animation. So a Dark Empire animated movie or series.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
would be amazing.
If Dark Empire, Shadows of the Empire, I think would be probably the two.
Massively.
Yeah, and especially Shadows, because you think, well, that was definitely much more of a Lucasfilm. I mean, because of what it was, you know, the whole multimedia kind of launch and stuff. That feels more like that could be something that they would be like, yeah, we could do that. You know, and I mean that would be cool because I mean, I'll be honest, I liked the Tales of Jedi, the animation that we kind of get. But I kind of go, I just feel like they have missed an opportunity. You know,
do you think they shouldn't have took that title then? Sorry to step over. Do you think they shouldn't have took that?
I think maybe, yeah. I think I mean, the thing is, Tales of Jedi is such a low-hanging fruit as titles go for Star Wars brands.
But it wasn't in 1993 when they were doing the comic, though, was it? It was then. It was something. It meant something else.
Totally, exactly. And so you kind of go, well, maybe again, it's like you have to ask an 18-year-old who's not actually really aware of Legends and has never heard of like Kale Drummond. And I've always struggled to pronounce his name, along with many other Star Wars characters. So before you say it, and maybe it's that thing, isn't it? It's like, you know, is it from a certain point of view because we are of an age that we remember that, and Dark Horse Comics really was for fandom for a long time. You think about, there wasn't anything for such a long period of time except for the Legends books and comics. Has great importance to us, and maybe it does to others. And you know, every day you see like a post on a random Facebook group about Star Wars, and people are always asking like, I've just read Darth Plagueis, what can I read next? There's a million and different wonderful ways you can answer that, but I just say just jump in, just start. And especially like with the Legends stuff, you know, you don't have to buy an Essential Legends collection hardback. You can just probably go into your secondhand bookshop, and I will guarantee you there will be a used paperback ready and waiting with your name on it. Very
true. And something you said makes me think that as the years go by, the importance to the fandom, and I'm using that as a sort of a whole of the Legends era, the stuff that we were reading in the 90s, Mara Jade, Corran Horn, all those people that meant so much in that era. Boba Fett was like completely way up there.
He was a myth. Yeah,
he completely was
a myth. Yeah.
Whereas now you mentioned Boba Fett, and it doesn't hold anywhere near the same mystery, whatever you want to use, as it once did. There's other characters that have kind of come along and not superseded, but there's so much more to dive into.
Is that just because they've pulled the curtain back on Boba Fett a little bit too much by doing that whole, the Book of Boba Fett story and
even before then, it was demystified a lot in the Attack of the Clones era.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, exactly. In the prequels, it kind of.
But when it was Fett, like Dark Horse did all the Fett minis, those action adventure, man on a mission stuff. That's fine because he can reveal. It's a bit like Judge Dredd. He can reveal as much as he wants to reveal, or as much as the writer wants to reveal, but not reveal too much. To me, I think Fett should have never removed his helmet. Now, I'm not talking about young Fett as a kid. I don't mean Daniel Logan. That's fine. Obviously, he wasn't walking around with a helmet back then. Although when you see The Mandalorian season 3, the covert, when Mando turns up in the N1 and takes out that great big crocodile thing, they're all wearing the helmets. They're being brought into this clan. We know that there's different versions of what a Mandalorian is, and I find that fascinating. I love all of that. But I'm not picking on the Daniel Logan stuff, but I do think, as you say, they've shown us a bit too much about how the sausage was made with Fett. Now you've took a lot of that mystery away. And the problem with that as a process is that in the intervening time, Jon Favreau comes along and says, I've got an idea to do something. Bit like Boba Fett, really, and just took all the coolest elements of Boba Fett and turned it into Din Djarin and made it the Mandalorian. What's left for Fett?
And you can definitely understand why they've had to try and do something differently and take Boba Fett in a slightly different direction just to kind of delineate it. Otherwise, it's just like, again, there'll be people who'll be like, it's just the same as Mandalorian. But that's Mandalorian Prime. Yeah. That's Boba Fett.
Exactly that. Yeah, that's Boba Fett. Anybody who's come in the last 5 years will know the Mandalorian way better than they'll know Boba Fett. Boba Fett's that old fart in that series that came out a couple of years after, they won't know the history. And maybe not all of them will have kind of put two and two together and realised that that's the dude from Empire and Jedi in that little brief scene in the special edition of A New Hope. That's the same guy. And when people get snippy about Fett, all they'll say is that you never saw him do anything. It's all like word of mouth. Well, we know as readers of those 90s comics, going back to the question, reading all those miniseries, reading all the books, Tales of the Bounty Hunters and all the stuff we read in the 90s and the 2000s, we saw Fett do all this stuff. We read about it. That was our Disney Plus back then, wasn't it? That was how we got our fix. So I think the importance of those stories then is not what it is now. I'd love to see some of those Bounty on Barcuda and the Hutt stuff as well, the Jabba the Hutt stuff as well. All that sort of stuff get turned into like little 2 or 3 episode arcs in an anthology, Tales of the Underworld anthology series. I think there's definitely some currency in that.
Well, thank you very much to Mark and Corin for sending in that listener's question. Much appreciated. And so if you'd like to be like Mark and Corin and get not only your name mentioned in an episode of Making Tracks, but also your question read out and then badly answered, Mark, can you let everybody know how we can get in touch?
Yes, we're very good at badly answering questions. And this is how you can get in touch with us.
Big.
You said it.
Email radio@fanthatracks.com. Head to links.fanthatracks.com for links to our social media feeds, Fantha Tracks TV and Fantha Tracks Radio. Thanks to James Semple for the Fantha Tracks intro, Blues Harvest for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. New episodes drop Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time. Our weekly news show Good Morning Tatooine goes live Sundays at 9 o'clock UK time on Facebook and YouTube. And remember, Fantha Tracks is absolutely free, so it costs nothing to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
And that's me done for this episode.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you very much for hanging on in there with me this rather chilly Tuesday. I've got a blanket on me. Must be getting old. We will catch you on the bounce in the next episode of Making Tracks. So until then, stay safe, take care, buy lots of Star Wars and have a fantastic Star Wars week, whatever that means to you. And of course, as always, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Planet Leia.